Chapter 4. Wulf waited and watched for 2 nights, but Lady Winifred had not returned. Then, on the 3rd night, Arnon alerted him that the scent of the Earl was strong in the air, and he knew that his plan had worked. He hurried through the bailey with Stephen at his heels. "My lord, mayhap this idea is a bit ill-conceived. Do you think bringing the Earl's granddaughter here is a good idea?" Stephen was Wulf's right-hand man and older brother, but his cautiousness at times became irritating. He was a great warrior, and Wulf could always count on him to watch his back in battle. However, when it came to trying new things, the man was much too set in his ways for being only 29 years of age. "Stephen, just stay here and watch the castle until I return, and don't worry about what I'm doing." "Your cloak, Lord Wulf." His squire, Dolan, stepped forward from the shadows and the torchlight of the courtyard and slipped it around Wulf's shoulders. "Lord Wulf, your horse," said the stable-boy, walking up and handing him the reins. Wulf got atop his horse, raising his nose and sniffing the air. Winifred's scent was on the breeze tonight, and he could smell it all the way across the moorlands. It was sweet, spicy, and strong. Even stronger than the damned scent of that blasted cloak she wore that was dripping with her grandfather's stench. Aye, Lady Winifred's essence was very alluring. "Let me come with you," said Stephen. "This could be dangerous. I am your brother, and will protect you." "Nay," said Wulf with a shake of his head. "It's bad enough I have one brother in danger. I'll not risk the lives of 2. You must stay here, because the castle will be yours if anything should happen to me." Stephen, by inheritance, and being the eldest son, should have had his own castle before Wulf. But King Edward was the one to give this castle to him, not their father. Wulf had been favoured by the king years ago when he saved his liege lord from death in a very deadly battle. So at the death of their father last year, King Edward bestowed Babeny Castle upon Wulf instead of Stephen. "Do you want some of your knights with you, my lord?" asked Stephen. "I could have a dozen ready in a minute." "No, Stephen, I don't." "Of course I'll be coming with you," said Dolan, reaching up to hand him a lit torch. "Nay," answered Wulf with a swish of his hand through the air. "No torch, no squire, no men. Arnon is already in the forest, and he'll watch my back, though I don't see the need. The girl is by herself. I hardly think she's a threat." "Remember, she fights with a crossbow, my lord, and has already killed over a dozen wolves," protested his squire. "Well, I fight with a sword, and have killed hundreds of men. So what is the problem?" He straightened his sword in the scabbard and flipped his cloak over the sides of his horse. "She is one young girl, and I'm more than able to handle this myself." "As a man, not a wolf," said Stephen quietly. "I'll pretend I didn't even hear that tinge of doubt in your voice, brother." Wulf gripped onto the reins and turned his horse in a full circle. "I was just urging you to be cautious, my lord. That is all." "Your excessive cautiousness is not an admirable trait for a knight, Sir Stephen," he reminded him. "If you don't stop it, you're going to have to face your demons some day." With that, he kicked his heels into the sides of his horse and headed toward the forests of Tavistock, anxious to see Lady Winifred once again. Winifred made her way on horseback through the woods. She looked over her shoulder once again, hoping the guard wouldn't give away her secret. This time she'd not only had to kiss him, but she paid him 2 shillings as well to let her leave the castle walls. She'd made him promise not to reveal the secret to her grandfather. She wiped her mouth with the back of her hand as she rode, trying to rid herself of the wretched taste of the man's sour lips that had reeked from ale. Now that she'd kissed Lord Wulf, no other kiss would be adequate again. She rode toward the knoll, this time not having bread, meat, and fruits in her basket. This time she had a dagger hidden inside the basket under a tart she'd pilfered from the kitchen. It had been prepared early for the morrow's meal. She wasn't sure if she should trust Lord Wulf if she happened to meet up with him again. Though she longed to be kissed by him, she had to remind herself that he was still the enemy. This time, if he took her crossbow from her, she'd have a hidden dagger for protection against him, and the wolf. She stopped at the knoll and slipped off the horse, looking around, but not hearing anyone this time. She was almost disappointed not to find Lord Hugh de Bar standing in the shadows. She crept forward, running her fingers gently over the rocks at the outskirts of the knoll, searching for the secret door. Since it was foggy and she couldn't see much in the dark, she would have to go by feel and from memory. She searched for a while, confident she would find something, but unfortunately she didn't. Winifred put down the basket and let out a sigh, deciding she'd try another approach. "I've brought you food, and mean you no harm," she called out. She waited and watched and listened, but still nothing. Then, when she was sure she'd imagined the whole thing, the fog parted, and there in front of her was a wooden door in the knoll, with a light shining out from inside the keyhole. "Come closer," a muffled voice called out from behind the door. She picked up the basket and daringly did just that. "Who are you?" she called out. "Do you need help? Can you show yourself?" "You need to put the key in the lock." "What key?" She looked around the ground and under her feet. Then she saw a glimmer of something from up above the door. She reached up and her fingers brushed against something metal. She stood on her tiptoes, barely able to reach it, since she was quite short. She was so small that she'd often been teased and called a child by others her age, long after she'd entered into adulthood. Stretching with all her might, she was finally able to reach it. She could feel it in her hand. It was a key. "I thought I'd find you here," came a deep voice from behind her. Startled, she pulled her hand away without the key. As she turned, the fog covered the area and hid the door completely. "Lord Wolf!" Her heart sped up when she saw him standing there, looking better than he had the other night. This time he wore the clothes of a nobleman, not just a simple tunic of a commoner. He wore a doublet made from the finest leather, over what looked like a black silk tunic that hung down to his waist. He had dark breeches that ended just above the knee, pulled tightly over dark hose. His leather boots were high and came nearly up to his knees. He wore jeweled rings on his fingers and a metal chain bearing a cross around his neck. His long black hair was pushed back behind his shoulders, and he had a slight beard and mustache that were trimmed and neat. He was noble and wealthy and dangerous. He was also very handsome indeed. It was just what she wanted in a man. His presence excited her. Her eyes darted over to her horse in the distance, and to her horror, she realized she'd been so focused on finding the hidden door that she'd left her crossbow slung over the pommel of her horse's saddle. She was now unprotected. "You seem frightened." "Are you?" He came closer, and she backed away from him. Her ankle turned as she stepped on a rock, causing her to reach back and catch herself against the earthen wall of the knoll so she wouldn't fall. He now had her trapped, with nowhere to run and no way to fight him at all. "Should I be frightened?" she asked bravely. Her eyes darted down to the basket at her feet. "I'm glad you decided to return, because it has made this so much easier than trying to break into the Earl's castle to get you." "Get me? Why does it sound as if—" "As if I'm abducting you?" He chuckled. "Mayhap because I am." He had the nerve to grin at her and chuckled again. She now doubted that she'd done the right thing by coming here alone for the second time. She'd been so obsessed with finding the secret door that she had pushed all fear of this man from her mind when she'd set out on her mission. Or possibly a part of her had put herself in this man's path once again on purpose. Either way, she was already regretting her decision. "I'll not go anywhere with you." "Oh, I think otherwise. Now, let's go." He reached out for her arm, and she swatted his hand away. "Nay." "I am not a patient man, Red. I said let's go." "Red?" Her heart jumped. She rather liked his little endearment, and wondered if he'd called her that because of her red hair, or because it was a shortened form of Winifred. He reached out for her again. This time when he did, a wolf came bolting out of the shadows, snapping its jaws and growling at her. "Arnon, nay!" He commanded the wolf to retreat, but it had no intentions of stopping. In her defense, she dove for the basket and flung open the wooden lid, shoving her hand inside. She made a mess of the cherry tart in her attempt to quickly grab the dagger, but at this point she didn't care. Winifred held up the weapon and turned as the wolf lunged for her. She managed to nick its shoulder with the blade in the process. The wolf whimpered. Lord Hugh de Bar shouted out in pain, and she had no idea what happened from there. Before she knew it, the man had dragged her to her feet and kicked the wolf away at the same time.
"Arnon, I said no!"
She wasn't sure if he was angrier with the wolf or with her. He ripped the dagger from her hand and flung it across the ground. The wolf stumbled off, leaving a trail of blood on the ground. He leaned over and grabbed her by the arms. "Leave me alone," she said, pushing against his shoulders, hearing him curse in the process.
"God's eyes, wench! Stop it before I have to beat you over the head!"
"What?" She removed her hands from him. In the moonlight, she saw red dripping from her fingers. His shoulder was red as well. She thought at first it was from the cherry tart, but then realized his shoulder was bleeding, though she hadn't touched him with the dagger at all. She'd only stabbed the wolf. What just happened?
"Give me that damned cloak!"
He pulled the cloak from her body and used his dagger to rip it to shreds in front of her and threw it to the ground. She watched in horror, not sure why he would do such a thing. "That was my grandfather's cloak," she spat. "I know." He replaced his dagger at his side and winced as his hand went to cover his bloody shoulder. "The wolf can smell the Earl's scent on it, and it drives him mad, as it does me. What were you thinking wearing that here?" "I thought I was in disguise. I didn't think I smelled like wolf bait." "Now I'll not tell you again. You'll stop fighting and come with me." "I won't!" She took off at a run for her horse, hoping she'd be able to outride him.